Hello, and welcome to this quiet corner, a space where you can drift where the noise of the day begins to fade, and where your mind can wander into the folds of the impossible. You can almost hear it now, the soft hush of waves far above the gentle clicking of small creatures hidden in coral crevices, and the slow, distant heartbeat of the ocean itself. Down here, light is not something taken for granted. It is a visitor arriving in softened, bending rays that dance on drifting particles before being swallowed by the deep, where curiosity can slowly explore and science is free to grow. There is a question you've probably never truly let sink in. What if we weren't alone? Not in the stars, but in the very waters of our own planet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Tonight, we're not staying in the present. We're going very far back. So far that even the world beneath our feet will seem unfamiliar. Now let's turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's enjoy tonight's journey. You're sitting in a small research submersible, barely enough room to stretch your legs. The hum of the engines is low and steady, like a cat's purr in the background. Outside, the water is a shifting sapphire haze, but with every meter you descend, the glow fades. This is the upper boundary of the twilight zone, that strange in-between layer where sunlight struggles to reach, and yet life flourishes in strange forms. Lanternfish flash in sudden bursts like camera shutters. Transparent squid drift past their organs, shimmering in soft blues and greens. Somewhere far off, a whale's call bends through the water, deep and resonant. You remember from training that only about 1% of sunlight reaches this depth. For human eyes, it's dim, almost dreamlike. But for creatures adapted to it, this world is alive with shifting shadows and bursts of light. Some fish here are coated in mirror-like scales, reflecting whatever faint glow reaches them, so they vanish into the background. Others carry their own lanterns, pockets of bacteria that glow on command. And in the periphery of your view, you see something you can't explain. At first, it's easy to mistake it for another school of bioluminescent fish. But the formation isn't random. It moves as one, not in the erratic, reactive way of prey animals, but with the measured grace of something that knows exactly where it's going. The lights within the shape are not identical. They flicker in patterns, sometimes in quick sequences, other times in long, slow pulses, almost like phrases. And just when you're sure your eyes are playing tricks, the whole mass shifts direction, not because of a predator or current, but as though responding to something unseen. You ease forward in the pilot's seat, the soft creak of the harness straps the only sound breaking your breathing. The sonar pings quietly. The blip of the unknown shape stays steady. A shiver creeps up your arms, not fear exactly, but the awareness that you might be seeing something new, or someone new. Scientists call this part of the ocean the mesopelagic zone. It's home to species we still know almost nothing about. In fact, 95% of this zone remains unexplored by humans. That's an astonishing number when you realize how close it is to the surface compared to the Hadal trenches below. But this is also a region of migration every night. Countless creatures rise toward the surface to feed under cover of darkness, then sink back before the dawn. If something alien wanted to live in our oceans without being seen, this is where it could pass unnoticed for centuries. Your eyes adjust to the faint light of the instrument panel as the shape outside grows clearer. It's no longer just a blur of points, it has structure. The lights outline long, flexible forms like tendrils or arms radiating from a central mass. It moves in spirals, shedding faint trails of glowing plankton in its wake. The entire being, or beings, drift slowly in front of you, and for a moment you swear the lights are pulsing in a rhythm that matches your heartbeat. The pilot in you wants to edge closer, but the human in you hesitates. Down here, curiosity is tempered by the reality that you are very, very small in a very, very big world. Still, you can't resist leaning forward until your helmet visor nearly touches the sub's dome. A passing hatchetfish glances at the shape, then veers sharply away, as if it recognizes something you don't. Then it happens. The lights pause just for a breath, and a single spiral of brightness curls outward, lingering in the water, before fading. It's not random. It's a deliberate signal. And just as suddenly as you found them, they fade into the gloom, dissolving into the drifting silt, until only the dark remains. You sit there for a while longer, hands resting on the controls, trying to make sense of what you've seen. It's possible you just witnessed a natural phenomenon, but it's also possible you've made first contact without ever leaving Earth. Random fact: to drift on some of the most advanced camouflage on Earth exists in these depths, not from alien tech, but from tiny copepods that can bend light around their bodies, becoming nearly invisible. It's a reminder that sometimes the line between alien and earthly is thinner than we think. The sub's external lights flicker on at half power, washing the nearby water in a pale cone. You know better than to flood the deep sea with brightness down here. Light is an announcement, not a convenience. Predators notice, prey scatter, but you want just enough to read the currents and maybe catch sight of that strange living constellation again. You ease the sub lower, dipping beneath a curtain of drifting salps, their jelly bodies linked like a floating necklace. The faint trail of glowing plankton left by the unknown beings is already breaking apart, swirling into ghostly clouds. Still, there's something in your bones telling you they're close. Maybe they're curious about you, the way you are about them. Maybe they're watching. Minutes pass. The pressure gauge ticks higher, 600 meters now. Your ears pop gently as the subsystems hum in counterpressure. Outside the dome, the dim blue shifts toward indigo, then near black. This is where most human divers never go without a machine like yours. It's a place where your heartbeat sounds loud, and the smallest shift in the water feels important. And then you see it again. Not the whole formation this time, just one fragment. A single glowing figure, moving with smooth certainty. The body is long, jointless, flexible, like a ribbon in a current. The light patterns along it flicker in clusters, some forming perfect spirals, others in what looks like binary and off on off. You catch yourself wondering if that's absurd aliens in binary. But light and dark are universal, and perhaps mathematics really is the language of the universe. You drift alongside it at a respectful distance. There's no visible head, no eyes you can make out, yet you feel its attention on you. It turns slightly, the lights down, its body dimming except for one band near its center, which glows brighter, almost white. The sub's sensors register a faint vibration, not from the engines, but from the water itself, as though it's sending a low-frequency hum directly through the currents. A thought surfaces. What if this isn't just movement? What if it's conversation? You tap a control, releasing a soft pulse from the sub's external acoustic system, mimicking the frequency you think you heard. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the alien's lights ripple from one end to the other, like someone dragging their hand through a line of dominoes. The vibration returns, slightly altered. It feels responsive. The exchange is short, barely a minute, but it's enough to make your hands sweat inside your gloves. This isn't random animal behavior. It's deliberate, structured. And in the back of your mind, a truth quietly anchors itself. You're not just observing life, you're being observed back. The being drifts upward, fading into the murk, and you realize you've been holding your breath. You let it out slowly, feeling a strange combination of exhilaration and calm, the way you might after a good dream you know you'll remember. Your navigation console beeps softly. Ahead, the seafloor is rising into a ridge, its surface covered in what at first looks like coral. But as you close the distance, you see it's something else entirely. The structures are two regular towers that spiral like shells, but stand as solid as rock, each one spaced evenly apart, like a forest planted with perfect precision. The tallest of them rises perhaps 15 meters from the seabed, its surface marked with grooves that catch the faint, bioluminescent glimmers drifting past. A soft current stirs sand between them, revealing connecting ridges, thin, almost delicate bridges that link tower to tower. You lean forward, your forehead nearly against the glass, as the realization blooms in your mind. This isn't a reef. This is architecture. Marine life swirls between the structures. Tiny shrimp, translucent worms, slow-moving jelly-like creatures that cling to the tower's surfaces. Some of them glow faintly as if they're part of the design. The symmetry is uncanny. If humans had built something this precise underwater, it would take armies of engineers, heavy equipment, and a good deal of luck to keep it standing against the currents. But here it is, untouched, unmoving, seemingly alive in its own way. You guide the sub into the forest of towers, careful not to touch anything. The lights from your vessel scatter across the grooves, casting shifting patterned onto the sandy floor. You can't help but wonder if those grooves are decorative, or functional, maybe channeling water the way our aqueducts carried air. A sudden movement catches your eye. From behind one tower, two glowing shapes emerge, smaller than the first being you saw, but moving with the same fluid precision. Their lights pulse in alternating waves as they spiral around one another, never touching. You realize with a small shiver that you might be intruding on someone's home. But they don't approach aggressively. Instead, they circle the sub, slowly, keeping a deliberate distance. Their lights flicker in slow sequences now, like long sentences drawn in Morse code. You don't understand it, not yet, but you can tell there's meaning there. Your console pings again, soft, rhythmic. Not from your own instruments, but from outside. A sonar ping that's not yours. You think for one impossible moment that they might be scanning you the same way you're scanning them. And then, as quickly as they appeared, the two shapes vanish behind another tower, melting into the gloom, like shadows in mist. You're left with the quiet hum of the engines and the faint creak of the hull under pressure. Random fact, to drift on the mantis shrimp, a very real Earth creature, has eyes so complex they can see polarized light, ultraviolet, and colors beyond human comprehension. Imagine what a species evolved in total darkness might be able to perceive. You angle the sub to idle and let the current do the gentle work, drifting through the spiraled forest, as if you've pulled into a cathedral made of salt and patience. The towers aren't identical. They're variations on a theme, each one repeating curves you recognize from seashells and hurricanes. You trace a groove with your eyes and notice how the line widens, narrows, widens again, a breath drawn into stone. It feels like walking a labyrinth without moving your feet. In this unified world, form follows flow. You switch to passive acoustic listening. The sub hushes itself. Immediately you hear a murmur you hadn't noticed, water threading through narrow channels inside the towers, a soft, continuous hush, like wind over a bottle. The architecture isn't static. It's playing the current like a flute. Your hands hover over the controls as you imagine how it works. If you were a species that spoke in pressure and light, wouldn't you carve walls that could sing your language back to you? A slow spin of the craft reveals details you'd missed. The bases of the towers flare into low buttresses, each buttress pocked with honeycomb chambers the size of your palm. Silt drifts in, is caught and settles. Microbes get a place to live, little power plants in a city of flow. The material looks like a composite layers of mineral plates, interleaved with something organic, a chitin-like sheen, lending flexibility where rock alone would crack. You think of nacre, of how mollusks layer calcium carbonate into brick-and-mortar micro-architecture that resists fracture. Here, it's as if someone took nacre's idea and scaled it into neighborhoods. You bring the sub closer to a seam where two spiral ribs meet. The seam isn't glued, it's grown. Along its edge, tiny crystal fans branch in precise, repeating angles, 32 degrees, 32 again, like a recipe followed by a patient chef. The spacing of towers around you feels intentional too. Not a grid, not random, but something between, like a quasi-crystal tiling that refuses to repeat, yet never loses order. You smile despite yourself. It's the kind of layout urban planners argue about for a decade and a half, and here it simply exists. No committee meetings, No coffee breath, no "we'll circle back" emails. You flip a low-power LiDAR, sweep across one facade. The returning image sketches channels that spiral inward, narrowing until they meet a central cavity. You imagine pressure differentials tuning the space, a resonant chamber that hums when the current is just right. A message embedded in a building architecture as amplifier. In this unified world, walls are wiser than words. You can't help comparing it to what humans found when we finally looked closely at the deep. A historical echo rolls up from memory, 1977, the submersible Alvin descending to the Galapagos Rift, and a team of scientists stumbling on black smokers, hydrothermal vents, belching mineral-rich water hot enough to cook dinner. Don't worry, no recipes tonight. Entire ecosystems flourished there without sunlight, living on chemistry, and the world went quiet for a second, because something fundamental had just changed. You're living a rhyme of that moment now. Where vents built chimneys from mineral rain, these aliens have coaxed the ocean into instruments, homes, possibly temples, all without scaffolds or cranes. The event tethers your awe. Discovery is a habit the planet keeps. You angle your lights outward, just a touch, and something within the tower answers faint glows, racing along internal veins. The sub's pressure sensors register a gentle pulse from below, as if a diaphragm slow presses the seafloor and lets go. The structure replies to the ocean's heartbeat. If there's power to be had here, it's harvested from the daily music of tides, from the groaning of plates, from the whisper of the world turning. Forget solar panels. This is tidal sonata technology. You imagine an energy grid measured not in volts, but in size. Power bill, congratulations. You generated a lovely lullaby this month. The constellation beings appear again, distant between two spires, their bodies like ribbons of night trimmed with stars. They don't approach, they align. 3 of them arrange themselves at the corners of a triangle whose edges pass cleanly through 3 neighboring towers. Their lights brighten, dim, brighten, and your instruments catch a neat pattern, a phase delay in each tower's acoustic hum, stepping around the triangle like a slow waltz. You realize you're watching them tune the place. Not performance as decoration, but calibration. City Maintenance, Deep Ocean Edition. Somewhere topside, a human technician tightens a bolt. Down here, a citizen sings to a wall. You drift on, inhaling the choreography. A spiral stair of grooves wraps one slender column, except there are no steps. Only trackways sized perfectly for the small gelatinous creatures you saw earlier. They seep upward in slow caravans grazing films that grow where fresh water threads through. Farming, but vertically, but softly. In this unified world, even a staircase is a garden. And then there's the unassuming plaza at the center, a wide bowl in the sand, rimmed with low-ribbed rings. You cut thrust and hover over it. The bowl hisses with microcurrents that swirl grains into slow vortices. When a fish crosses the rings, flicker not as signal, but as measure their light output, correlates with the speed of flow. You've seen this before in a different guise, the way wind tunnels paint smoke to reveal turbulence. Here the city paints water. Maybe this is their town square, a place to read the day's currents. Perhaps this is where decisions are felt. A sudden thought lands playful as a bubble and impossible to avoid if these towers were a real estate listing, ocean view included, would finally mean something. Also, HOA meetings would be literally wavelength discussions. You stifle a laugh that sounds too loud in your helmet, and the sub's mic records it as a tiny bark. You hope the neighbors don't mind. Your parking job is very respectful. Promise. You swing the camera to macro and take a close look at one tiny outcrop near a seam. You expect pure mineral, but the analysis returns traces that raise your eyebrows, silica magnesium-rich calcite, and weight piezoelectric crystals embedded in a lattice. If pressure waves tickle these crystals, they could produce small electric potentials. Architecture as sensor array. Architecture as nervous system. Suddenly, the city isn't just singing. It's listening. The notion wraps you like a warm blanket. In this unified world, walls remember. A ribbon being glides close. For a breathless second, it matches your drift, then releases a chain of soft light pulses that run the length of its body and vanish at its tip. You're not sure, but it feels like, "Please be gentle." You respond with the acoustic equivalent of a nod, a low, steady tone that says you understand, or at least that you're trying. Communication here is less about words and more like surfing a mood you can't yet name. You relax your shoulders and feel the whole sub relax with you. Yes, you and your metal friend are basically doing couples yoga at 800 meters. Namaste C. You mark a sample site on the nav and pull a hair-thin scrape of mineral from a flake that's already flaking. No harm, no touch. It stows itself in a small vial, like a secret. The lab topside will have a long night. You let the thought drift upward and vanish. Random fact: to drift on sea cucumbers, breathe through their rear ends, water and oxygen, absorbed water out. It's not glamorous, but it works like 90% of the best engineering solutions, duct tape included. You let the current carry you one more length past the outer ring. The towers thin, the spacing opens, and the murmur of the city fades into the general hush of the deep. Behind you, everything remains as it was, as it has probably been, for longer than your species has known how to write about anything. Ahead, the seafloor slopes toward a darker, quieter place, and the aliens' lights arc away like a constellation, reshelved on a different page of the sky. Across the vast land of Pangaea, long gone, long remembered, stone learned to listen to wind. Here in this ocean that has outlived continents, stone listens to water. You take the hint. You listen too. You let the sub follow the gentle slope down where the last fingers of the alien city release you to the broader ocean floor. The transition is subtle. One moment you're among the deliberate curves and patterns of the towers, and the next, the shapes grow irregular, returning to the rugged geometry of nature's own handiwork. Yet even here there's a feeling of presence, as though the aliens have shaped more than just their immediate city. Ahead, your instruments pick up a faint line of elevated terrain, a ridge no taller than a person, but stretching farther than your lights can reveal. When you get closer, you realize it's no random rise. Smooth arching shapes break the seafloor in repeating intervals. The ridges are covered in soft, moss-like growths that wave lazily in the current. But beneath the organic fuzz, you spot more of that mineral-organic composite alien craftsmanship hiding in plain sight. The ridge isn't a wall. It's a conduit. Narrow slots run along its crest, each one no wider than your wrist, and when you hold position beside it, you feel a subtle push of water, steady, controlled. It's moving water from one side to the other, not for drainage, but as if to feed something downstream. This is irrigation, but not for fields. The flow is heading toward a faint shimmer ahead, patches of light that pulse in slow heartbeat rhythm. You follow your speed, matching the water's pace, until the shimmer resolves into a grove of alien gardens. The plants here aren't plants in any earthly sense. They're anchored organisms, some tall and frond-like, others bulbous and squat, each with a faint inner glow. The light isn't constant. It flares and fades in cycles, sometimes in sync with others, sometimes not. As you circle, you notice schools of small, translucent creatures weaving through the grove, their movements careful and deliberate, like bees pollinating flowers. Every so often, one of the fronds bends slightly, releasing a puff of tiny motes into the water, which the small creatures eagerly collect. It clicks. This is farming. Not of crops as we know them, but of light-fed, nutrient-rich colonies, bioengineered to thrive in the chemical-rich waters these conduits deliver. It reminds you of how in 6000 BCE humans along the Nile learned to channel floodwaters into their fields, guiding nature to work in their favor. But here the flood is a constant, and the harvest glows in the dark. You drift between two towering fronds, their surfaces marked with spiraling lines, like fingerprints. The lines seem to channel faint electrical currents. Your sensors detect microvolt pulses, possibly to encourage nutrient flow within the organism itself. Farming with electricity. It's not so far-fetched. On the surface, we've begun experimenting with using mild currents to speed plant growth. These beings may have perfected it millennia ago. A movement at the edge of your light draws your attention. 3 alien figures glide into view, not the long ribbon-like ones from before, but shorter, more compact, with rounded bodies and multiple arm-like appendages trailing behind. Their light patterns are slower, gentler, and their movements precise as they tend to the grove. One brushes a frond with the tip of an arm, causing its glow to brighten. Another collects a cluster of motes into a pouch-like structure near its body. They don't react to you with alarm. In fact, one pauses, turns slightly toward your sub, and pulses a sequence of lights, short, long, short. It repeats twice before returning to its work. The pattern doesn't match anything you've seen so far, but it feels polite. Maybe a greeting, maybe a warning not to disturb the harvest. There's a rhythm here, a cycle you're only glimpsing. The conduits feed the gardens feed the smaller creatures. The smaller creatures carry nutrients, or perhaps genetic material between gardens. And the aliens oversee it all, not as farmers in constant labor, but as caretakers stepping in only when needed. In this unified world, agriculture isn't separate from architecture. It's just another layer in the living structure of their civilization. You angle your camera toward one particularly large, bulbous organism. It's easily 2 meters across its skin, translucent enough to reveal a slow swirl of glowing fluid inside. Every so often it contracts slightly, sending a ripple through the water. Your sensors pick up a chemical trace not harmful to you, but rich in amino acids. It's a food source, perhaps the alien equivalent of a grain silo. The thought makes you smile. Humanity has spent millennia inventing ways to store food from clay pots to refrigerated warehouses. Here the storage is alive, pulsing gently in the dark, both pantry and producer in one. A historical parallel drifts into your mind, early Polynesian cultures, carrying living plants and animals with them on long voyages, ensuring fresh supplies in far-off islands. The aliens seem to have mastered the same principle, but rooted in place, letting the ocean do the traveling for them, through currents. Your eyes follow one caretaker alien as it moves toward a small cluster of withered fronds. It touches them lightly, and within moments the fronds detach, drifting upward. The alien gathers them in an arm and carries them away toward the ridge. Perhaps they're composted. Perhaps they're recycled into building materials. In an ecosystem like this, nothing is wasted. It makes you think of how Earth's own coral reefs are often called the rainforests of the sea, cycling nutrients with incredible efficiency. Here, it's as if the rainforest has been designed, every root and leaf tuned for maximum balance. The sub's acoustic sensors pick up a low, steady thrum, not from the gardens, but from deeper below. You make a note. Something beneath this entire system may be feeding it all. And because the deep always keeps its sense of humor, a small, curious creature drifts up to your dome just then. It's shaped like a tiny umbrella, translucent, with 2 glowing dots that could be eyes or just markings that mimic them. It hovers there for a moment, then drifts away, leaving you with the strange feeling you've just been sized up by something the size of a teacup. If it could talk, it might say, "Nice sub. Needs more windows." Random fact to drift on kelp. The giant seaweed of Earth's shallows can grow up to 1/2 meter in a single day under the right conditions. Fast enough that if you sat and watched, you could almost see it stretch. Imagine tending a crop you could watch grow in real time. The ridge continues beyond the gardens, and the deeper thrum is still calling. You set a slow course to follow it, the alien caretakers fading into the dark behind you. Somewhere ahead, the current shifts, and with it perhaps the next secret. You slow the submersible to a crawl, letting the gentle slope pull you along toward that steady thrum. It's deeper here, the water colder, the darkness thicker. The beam of your lights seems to dissolve faster, as if the blackness is drinking it in. The hum on your instruments is still faint, but unrelenting, an undercurrent of sound that feels almost like a bass note in your chest. The terrain shifts again from soft sediment to fractured rock. Great fissures split the seafloor into jagged channels, their edges crusted with pale growths that sway like underwater grasses. Thin columns of shimmering water rise from some of the cracks, warping the light in rippling waves. Your temperature gauge blinks these seeps are warmer than the surrounding water. You edge closer to one fissure peering down into its depths, and that's when you see it. The rock walls are lined with glowing threads, like veins of molten metal frozen mid-flow. They pulse faintly in sync with the distant thrum, as if each beat pushes energy through a network. The glow doesn't just illuminate the fissure, it seems to animate it. Your mind jumps immediately to Earth's hydrothermal vents, the black smokers and white smokers that draw life to the abyss. In 1977, their discovery overturned our understanding of what ecosystems could be, proving that sunlight wasn't the only path to life. But this is different. This isn't chaotic, mineral-laden water spewing from chance cracks. This is controlled, channeled. The sub's chemical sensors chirp softly, logging a complex mixture in the vented water iron. Manganese sulfides and something else, a compound you can't match to any known database. It's stable, harmless to your vessel, but laced with an electrical charge. Not strong enough to power anything big, but enough to suggest potential. And then you notice them small alien constructs clinging to the fissure edges. They're no bigger than a basketball, but their surfaces are covered in tiny cilia-like structures brushing constantly through the vent flow. Every so often they release a pulse of light through their translucent shells, and you see the glow travel along the fissure wall before fading into the dark. It's a grid, a literal living power grid. The realization blooms slowly. The aliens down here aren't just harvesting chemical energy from the vents, they're harnessing it in ways that seem both technological and biological at once. The mineral veins in the rock, the constructs clinging to them, the pulsing glow, it's all connected. They're drawing energy from the Earth itself, storing it, and distributing it, perhaps to the city you just left. You angle the sub to scan wider and spot more fissures, each with its own cluster of constructs. Between them, the rock floor is etched with faint grooves like channels worn into stone over centuries. Some are natural, others clearly shaped. Your lights catch a momentary glint in one of them, a thin film of metallic sheen, as if the aliens have plated the grooves to conduct energy more efficiently. It's breathtaking in its simplicity. We on the surface dig for coal drill for oil or launch massive turbines into the air. Down here, they simply listen to the ocean's heartbeat and tap into its rhythm. As you drift over one fissure, a faint movement catches your eye. A larger alien figure rises slowly from the crack, its form blurred by the shimmering heat. This one is massive compared to the others you've seen, easily 3 times the length of your sub. It moves with deliberate slowness, trailing long tendrils that glisten with embedded lights. The tendrils brush against the fissure walls in a measured pattern, and with each touch the glow in the rock flares brighter. It's tending the grid. Your first instinct is to back away, but the creature doesn't react aggressively. Instead, it glides upward, inspecting one of the basketball-sized constructs, rotating it with a tendril before releasing it. The construct drifts slightly, then resettles in the vent flow, its cilia waving like grass in a breeze. You realize you're watching the alien equivalent of a technician, someone who knows every curve of the system, every weak pulse in the network. There's no rush in its movements, no wasted gesture. In the deep efficiency isn't just smart, it's survival. The sub's low-light camera picks up something else as the figure turns faint markings along its tendrils. At first they seem random, but when the tendrils pass over the glowing rock, the markings align perfectly with the fissure's pulse. Maybe they're not markings at all, but embedded sensors tuned to read and respond to the vent's energy. You hover quietly, recording. The thrum grows slightly louder. For a moment you think it's because you've moved closer to the vent system. But then you notice the surrounding fissures, brightening their pulses, sinking into a steady rhythm. It's not just the one technician, there are others farther out of sight, tuning the entire network in unison. The idea sends a shiver down your spine, you're witnessing the deep ocean equivalent of a city's power grid coming online. The larger alien drifts back toward the fissure and slowly descends until it vanishes into the glow. The basketball-sized constructs resume their gentle cilia brushing, and the pulses stabilize into a slower, steadier beat. You let the sub rise a few meters, scanning the horizon. In the distance, you can just make out another ridge, this one faintly lit by the same pulsing glow. If the network extends that far, then their civilization isn't confined to a single city. It's spread across vast stretches of the sea floor. A stray thought slips in, light enough to make you smirk. On Earth, our biggest power stations burn fuel or split atoms. Here, the utility company is basically a choir of alien electricians and some very cooperative rocks. Imagine calling tech support. Please hold while we send a glowing ribbon being to realign your vent flow. Random fact to drift on Earth, certain bacteria called geobacter can produce electricity as a byproduct of their metabolism enough to power small devices. It's not hard to imagine an advanced species scaling that up to run an entire city. You mark the fissure on your map, knowing you'll want to come back. For now, you set a course toward the faintly lit ridge in the distance, curious to see how far the heartbeat of this world truly travels. You ease the sub over a plain of fine gray ooze, the kind of seafloor that looks empty until you remember it's a library, each grain a page, each layer a chapter, written in silt and patience. You extend the core sampler with a careful press. The tube slips down like a thermometer into memory, and when you reel it back, a striped cylinder rises band after band, Wakalighter, Akura, the ocean keeping a diary in neat cursive. Under the microscope, a universe blossoms. At first, it's comfortingly ordinary foraminifera, with tight spirals, diatoms in glass houses, radiolarians, that look like architects' daydreams. Then your breath catches. One plate among the coccoliths is wrong in a beautiful way. A quasi-crystal, all five-fold symmetries, and never quite repeating order a geometry biology rarely bothers with. You tilt the stage, and the light scatters into crisp, discrete angles. Not random, not erosion. Intention without a signature. You anchor the sub and take a deeper core. The bands come up denser, compressed by the patience of ages. In this unified world, history is layered rather than lined. Shapes shift with depth, first familiar fossils from warm seas, then a sudden scarcity at a stratum flecked with tiny glass spherules, an old global bruise. Your mind supplies the headline, the Chicxulub impact 66 million years ago. The day the sky fell, and the oceans inhaled ash. Even here, far from any crater, the layer is unmistakable. Riding the same horizon are microscopic rods embedded with trace metals in ratios that make your instruments sit up. They're uniform in length, capped with nanostructured ends that look suspiciously like sockets. You glance at the earlier quasi-crystal plate, then back to the rods. The idea arrives soft as a wave assembly pieces. Not artifacts in the human sense, no coins, no statues, but modular biology parts of a larger puzzle built by a species that prefers to grow its tools. You pan across deeper slices. Oxygen isotope ratios rise and fall like tides inside numbers, telling of ice ages warmings and the long drift of continents. Across the vast land of Pangaea, when it was one currents, where different winds were stranger, and still the deep kept writing. You find layers from the Permian, the great dying, when most ocean life blinked out. Even there, especially, there the faint thread of that five-fold story persists, not bold, not gone, the way a melody survives behind noise. A grander turning comes to mind, the Cambrian explosion, roughly 541 million years ago, when body plans blossomed in a geological heartbeat, and the world's toolbox overflowed. A scientific event so seismic it rewired the plot, hard parts, jaws, eyes. Trilobites marching over seafloors that felt brand new. Maybe your ocean neighbors learned a lesson. We're still learning, diversify or disappear. Prototype fast, keep what works, let the rest drift away. The fossil record whispers that adaptability is architecture. You bag the cores like delicate pastries and stow them while your thoughts loop through parallels. On land, Mary Anning combed the cliffs in the early 1800s and pulled the deep past into human hands. Ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs revealed by patience and tide. Down here, you're doing the same with a robot's grace and a bedtime heartbeat, except your plesiosaur is a pattern and your fossil is a rhythm. Perk of the Abyssal Archive, no museum gift shop trying to upsell you a plush trilobite. Yet, the sonar ticks soft returns from nearby mounds. You drift over them and realize they're not rocks, but spheres of manganese and iron, the size of cabbages' polymetallic nodules. On Earth, they accrete around a seed over millions of years, adding concentric skins like onions. You shine your light and squint. The rings are there, but on a few nodules, faint radial spokes cut across the layers at regular intervals, as if someone used them as timekeepers, calibrating the ocean's clock when the rest of us were still learning to stand upright. You run a quick scan. The spokes share that same five-fold logic, subtly skewed to currents that no longer exist. Calendars carved by flow, a memory surfaces of another layered archive, the varves in Scandinavian lakes, annual bands of silt that let scientists count years, the way dendrochronologists count tree rings. Here the nodules may play a similar role, except the scribbles are not just dates. They might be notes. A curriculum perhaps for apprentices who learned to read the current's handwriting long before the towers learned to sing. Best part, no librarian shushing you. The ocean is already whispering. A ribbon being glides through your light cone and pauses as if waiting for you to flip to the next page. Its body pulses a brief sequence that echoes the five-fold symmetry you saw in the cores, short, long, long. You answer with a gentle ping, a hello, written in patience. The being arcs away, leaving a twist of motes that settle like snow on a small burrow nearby. You almost miss the burrow until a faint glow ruffles its rim. Zoom in. The lip of the tunnel is lined with microplates, each etched in those same non-repeating patterns, each tilted to face a different slice of water. If a current shifts, the array would feel it. If a chemical trace passes, the plates would taste it. A fossil sensor long abandoned, but still wired to the sea. It's easy to imagine an ancestor of your caretakers living here, through a colder epoch, reading the world with its doorway, the way humans once read smoke from a distant hill. You think about how we sometimes debate whether the fossil record shows progress or just change. Down here it feels more like a braided stream branches, dividing, rejoining, carrying the same water forward by many paths. The alien's thread runs slenderly through catastrophe and calm alike, never loud, never gone. That quiet persistence might be their greatest technology. If you want a motivational poster, hang in there. But the kitten is a trilobite wearing tiny sunglasses. You pull back from the microscope and watch the dark plain beyond your dome. A gentle current shivers the silt, smoothing your sub's shadow until it looks like nothing at all. You feel an odd, buoyant hope if a civilization can make its past part of its present. Grow tools that become fossils that become lessons. Maybe staying hidden was never fear, but philosophy. Maybe the deepest archive isn't a vault. It's a garden that keeps reseeding itself. And yes, this library does not fine you for late returns. Random fact, to drift on sharks are older than trees. They cruised ancient seas for hundreds of millions of years before forests figured out leaves. In ocean time, wood is the new kid. You ease the sub ahead, cores secured, lights dimmed. The seabed unspools in slow motion, and the thrum from deeper layers returns like a faraway drum. Across the vast land of Pangaea, once a single story, and here in this unified world of many stories you keep reading, the page keeps turning itself. You angle the sub toward a valley where the seafloor folds into low dunes, and the first hints of a different economy flicker in the dark. The current smells, if your instruments could call it a smell, faintly of amino acids and sulfides, richer than the open plain, like the ocean has been cooking a slow stew for a very long time. You dim your lights and let the valley reveal itself one glow at a time. The food web here looks familiar. At first, tiny glowing particles drift like dust in a sunbeam. Small grazers nibble through clouds of plankton. Larger shapes patrol the edges with the patience of old cats. Then you notice the edits. Curtains of bioluminescent filaments hang between basalt pylons, not as fences, but as shepherds opening and closing by a fraction to steer the microscopic drift. Where the filaments bow inward, plankton gathers. Where they relax, it flows free. You've seen fishers on the surface use tide and light to call fish into nets at night. Down here, the nets are made of rhythm, and the catch is measured in mouthfuls too small to measure, unless you can feel currents the way these neighbors can. You follow a vein of brighter water toward a basin where the bottom is carpeted with low, velvety mats. They glow with a slow, breathy pulse. Your chemical sensors murmur happily sulfide-rich water threads up from below, and the mats are chewing on it. Chemosynthesis. The old miracle repeated in 1,000 quiet places, turning chemistry into sugar, where sunlight never bothers to visit. But the layout is different from natural vent fields. The mats lie in rings and spirals spaced so that eddies fall just right, as if a gardener mapped every swirl before any seed was planted. Small crustaceans, translucent, jointed with segmented backs that shimmer like stacked coins, move over the mats in tidy lanes. They don't graze at random. They float their bodies a millimeter above the surface and fan the films with delicate paddles, sloughing old layers so fresh chemotrophes can bloom. When they pause, they gather the loosened films into tiny boluses and tuck them into side pouches. Herd animals, but the field is a living rug, and the herd is a quiet, synchronized cleaning crew. You've never seen polite eating until you've watched 1,000 little vacuum cleaners agree on a lunch break. A larger alien caretaker drifts in compact body, a corona of tendrils accompanied by 3 juveniles that sparkle more than they glow. The adult arcs once over the basin, and the bioluminescent curtains shift in response, tightening near a downstream edge. The juveniles take positions over auxiliary mats, their lights pulsing in soft, regular beats that coax the crustaceans into new lanes. It's choreography, not command. In this unified world, the farmer plays conductor, and the field hums in the same key. Above the basin, schools of small fish graze on plankton plumes, shepherded gently along the curtain walls. You watch the caretaker release a sequence of light pulses straight up, and for a long second, nothing happens. Then the school turns, not in a panicked flock, but in a measured arc toward a side channel framed by tall, frond-like organs you've learned to read as storage. They nibble where the flow is richest, and then pass on. No corrals, no panic, just guidance. You think of old irrigation systems in Mesopotamia, canals, and shadufs, water muscled from river to field, so barley could stand where desert once lay. The historical rhyme lands with a satisfying click. We shaped rivers. They shape currents. We called the result bread. They call it breath. A memory bubbles up. The Challenger expedition, 1872 to 1876, the first grand survey of the world's oceans. Sailors and scientists hauled miles of line-dredged mud and pulled up a revelation life everywhere, even where maps simply wrote, "Here be nothing." Challenger drew the first outlines of deep-sea food webs, and the world blinked awake to the ocean's complexity. You glance at the basin and feel the same awakening. A second-wave food webs can be encouraged without chains or cages. Abundance can be tuned like an instrument. The event feels less like a headline and more like a bedtime story the planet has been telling itself since it learned to breathe. You edge the sub along a gentle slope where the mat gardens give way to another layer, columns riddled with pores. Each pore home to a small, pearly organism tethered by a living filament. When a plume of nutrients passes, the pearls blossom like umbrellas, filtering particles with frilled edges, then folding shut and passing the caught food back down the filament to the stalk. Colonial filter farms billowing and resting in slow, shared rhythms. Your instruments catch tiny chemical pings between neighboring stalks, signals that modulate opening times to avoid stealing each other's breeze. Symbiosis here is polite, yes, but it's also wired. At the margin of light, a shadow slips through something Earth-made odd against the alien grammar. A grenadier fish with its long tail and solemn face cruises the border and pauses, baffled by the arranged glow. It tries a nibble at the mat's edge, then reconsiders, and wanders off like a diner who walked into the wrong restaurant and decided to pretend it was all part of the plan. The caretaker lets it pass. A food web that can tolerate freeloaders is a strong one. You know this from reefs, from forests, from cities at dusk. You think aloud, voice barely above a whisper, about mutualisms, you know. Tube worms at vents feeding off bacteria inside their own bodies. Clams and mussels beating the same drum. Corals and algae sharing sugar and shade like old friends in lawn chairs. Down here, the mutualisms feel broader, braided with intent. The aliens don't own the base of the web. They nudge it, they soothe it. They spin scaffolds of light and pressure so that energy falls where mouths wait, and mouths find what they need, without rushing. Across the vast land of Pangaea, when coasts were different and winds were strange, meaning flowed from pattern. It still does. A small procession approaches along the valley floor, half a dozen of those translucent crustaceans, in a tidy line, each carrying a neat pellet, each stopping at a shallow pit rimmed in that mineral organic composite. They deposit their cargo, and the rim glows briefly, as if the pit had thanked them for their service, and logged the delivery. You imagine a ledger written in light inventory, updated by appetite. If only your fridge could do that. Fewer sticky notes, fewer who ate the last yogurt mysteries. A juvenile caretaker breaks formation and drifts closer to your dome. It flashes a tentative pattern, long, short, short, long, pause, long. You answer with a gentle ping in the same rhythm, and the juvenile's body brightens with what you can only interpret as delight. It traces a small loop, then rejoins its parent, leaving a comet tail of motes that sparkle like confetti. Congratulations, you've just said nice garden in Deepish, Duolingo owl, eat your heart out. You pass into a narrower channel where the ceiling lowers and the current quickens. Here the food web tilts vertical. Ropes of bacterial slime hang like chandeliers strands anchored to overhangs and weighted with mineral beads. Small amphipods climb them hand over hand, nibbling selectively, while slender fish hover like hummingbirds, sipping from the rope's dripping edges. The overhang hums faintly tuned to the flow so that the ropes never tangle. Architecture again, finding the kinder way for energy to become nutrition. A grin finds you uninvited as you imagine deep-sea grocery aisles, matte greens, aisle 3. Filter pearls, aisle 5. Please return your carts to the bioluminescent bay. You let the silliness pass and keep drifting. Humor, like plankton, is happier when it drifts. Random fact to drift on lobsters taste with tiny chemosensory hairs on their legs and feet, sampling the seafloor as they walk. In a buffet line, a lobster is basically the sommelier. Pairs well with more lobster. Let's not. You pull back to a wider view. The valley, the curtains, the gardens, the filter colonies, the grazing schools. All of it breathes together. No single trick carries the weight. The web holds because the threads are many. In this unified world, abundance isn't a spike but a tide, and the caretakers ride it without hurry. You feel your own breath slow to match the basin's pulse, and the sub's soft hum answers like a friend finishing your sentence. Ahead, the curtains thin, the lanes widen, and the valley opens toward a dim horizon dotted with quiet sentinels. The meal is over, the dishes are washed, and the ocean is already laying the table again. You set a course for the next soft shimmer, and let the current write the next page for you. You dim your lights until the sub is a gentle ember, and ease into a broad amphitheater, scooped from the sea floor. The walls are low, scalloped by current, and the floor is a clean expanse of pale sand, so smooth it feels deliberate, like someone raked it moments ago. You hold still. The water stills with you. And then the first stroke appears, a thin, wandering ribbon of light that brushes the sand and leaves a line, glowing and fading in its wake, a calligraphy drawn on darkness itself. More ribbons join, moving with unhurried grace. Their bodies aren't paintbrushes, they're projectors casting soft bands that intersect and diverge. Where two bands cross, a flower blooms brief, perfect, gone. You realize you're watching a story that's told in passing. No canvas, no ink, just light and memory. In this unified world, the tale lives in the retelling, not the archive. A trio of compact caretakers take stations along the amphitheater's rim. Their tendrils hover a hand's width above the sand and produce a hush you feel through the hull more than hear a low-pressure hum that corrals the silt into gentle dunes. The ribbons respond, shaping their arcs to the contours. Bright spots dwelling longer in the hollows, quick flickers skipping the ridges. The stage is alive with feedback. You think of shadow puppets and planetarium shows, and the way music lights up a room even when your eyes are closed. When the first motif returns, you catch its refrain, a spiral that tightens, loosens, tightens. A journey, a narrowing, a release. A second motif slides beneath it, like a bass line, 5 pulses spaced irregularly, never quite repeating the same gap. You smile. There's that quasi-crystal logic again, the 5-fold patience you've been finding in rocks and nodules, now sung in light. The aliens aren't just decorating the water, they're quoting their own geology. A thought surfaces as gentle as a surfacing chaos. This is how meaning moves in a place where pages can't be turned. Human history kept its oldest stories on cave walls, where firelight made the painted bison appear to run. In 1940, 4 teenagers and a dog stumbled into Lascaux and found a gallery so vivid it seemed to breathe. Paleolithic artists had used the rock's bulges to animate their herds. A scientific historical turning proof that image and motion are older friends than we guessed. Down here the rock is water, the fire is bioluminescence, and the herd is a constellation you can stand inside. The event doesn't shout. It glows. The amphitheater brightens. Ribbons cluster then peel away, leaving trails that fade like breath on glass. You notice how the sequence makes a map, a river of light, divides into tributaries. Each tributary whispers a pulse count, and when the counts align, the whole floor answers with a bloom that sweeps like wind through grass. Story as choreography. Narrative as current. Across the vast land of Pangaea long-merged, long-parted rivers learned to braid and unbraid. Here the braids are luminous, and the riverbed is a memory that remembers only while it flows. You catch the comic relief in their grammar, too. One ribbon dives unexpectedly through the center and pops a halo of motes that drift down like confetti, and 2 caretakers answer with a playful counterpunch of dimming and brightening, as if someone just told the world's gentlest joke. If there's a laugh track, it's a pod of distant whales snickering in slow motion. You find yourself grinning at nothing, a reflex the way you smile when a good story winks without breaking the spell. The performance changes key. The caretakers lean their tendrils closer to the sand, and the pressure hum deepens, sculpting a wide spiral trough. Ribbons converge on the trough's rim, and each time they cross a certain angle, their bodies flash in quick triplets. You recognize the structure before the meaning meter refrain chorus. You remember that humans invented written music to freeze song on paper, but long before notation rhythm lived in hands and feet and throats. Here, rhythm lives in density and drift and the timing of a light that knows when to linger. Your pilot's seat hums with a memory from the surface, 1799 soldiers building a fort near Rashid Rosetta, lifting a granodiorite slab carved in 3 scripts. The Rosetta Stone became the key. In 1822, Champollion connected the sounds, and Egyptian hieroglyphs began speaking again, after being silent for millennia. A scientific historical hinge swung open, and suddenly an entire civilization's stories had a voice. You realize you're hovering over your own Rosetta in progress. You've seen five-fold pulses in fossils, quasi-crystal tilings, in towers, phase-delayed hums in power grids. Now the light language wraps them into sentences. The temptation to decode is a warm tide. The wisdom to wait is a deeper one. A ribbon glides near your dome, slows, and paints three short arcs that rise and fall with precise spacing, then a long curve that holds steady, then a quick staccato spray. A greeting, a title card. You respond with a soft acoustic sweep that mirrors the spacing, and the ribbon brightens in an unmissable "heard you." It turns once and drapes a thin light across your viewport that resolves fleetingly into a web of pentagons and hexagons. It's a tessellation you can't tile perfectly on a flat plane, but in a curved dome like yours, it fits. You're not sure if that was for you or for them, but the joke lands anyway. Yes, your windshield just got photobombed by a geometry flex. Nerds of the abyss unite. The amphitheater's edges light with a new cast. Small lantern-bodied organisms rise from burrows and station themselves in a ring. Their lights dilate and constrict in a smooth wave that runs clockwise, then anti-clockwise like a heartbeat, choosing directions. In the center, a larger caretaker hovers and releases a slow, rising tone. The ring answers with a cascade of dim pulses that travel inward. When the cascade meets the sand's glow, lingers a fraction of a beat longer. A call and response, but also a rehearsal. They're timing the ocean itself, coaxing an echo out of a floor that forgets almost instantly. In this unified world, ephemera is not a flaw. It's the point. The story is meant to be lived, not kept. You tilt your head back and imagine a human audience here lulled into stillness, eyes following the way the light refuses to be owned. Every civilization you know learned to make stories, travel beads, scrolls, radio, fiber optics. But every one of those inventions started with a shared moment in a shared space, a fire circle, a drum beat, a wall that moved in torchlight. The amphitheater is that space underwater and patient. It asks for nothing more than your breath to match its breath. A small interruption tickles the scene like static. A Dumbo octopus flaps into view, pauses mid-spiral, and bobs, as if trying to clap. It drifts away, unoffended, and the ring of lanterns brightens briefly, as though acknowledging a guest cameo. You make a mental note to file that as the best unpaid extra in documentary history. The sequence resolves. The spiral trough fills itself back in as the hum lightens. The dunes flatten, and the sand returns to blank page. The ribbons dim. The ring sinks. Silence, but not empty silence, like a sentence that knows it ended well. You feel your shoulders drop and your jaw unclench, signs your body recognizes a lullaby, even when your mind is busy diagramming the syntax. Random fact to drift on, there's a real fish called the barreleye, whose head is partly transparent. Its eyes point up through a clear dome to watch for prey, silhouetted above, then swivel forward to eat. Nature invented periscope glasses long before late-night infomercials. You let the current spin you, once a slow salute to the stage. Across the vast land of Pangaea, once continuous, now scattered the oldest human art used fire to make rock move. Here the ocean uses pressure to make light whisper. In this unified world, you've learned the simplest rule of storytelling: show up, soften, and let the glow do the talking. You set a gentle course toward the next dim shimmer, the amphitheater fading behind you like a dream you can still feel on your skin. You nudge the sub into a tract of water that feels different. Not colder, not warmer, denser, as if it's been folded gently and laid back down. Your instruments tremble at the edges of certainty. The numbers are ordinary, but the experience isn't. You ease the thrusters to whisper and hold position. Around you, the darkness wears a faint halo, the way a thought wears a memory. A ribbon being slides in from the periphery and hovers at an angle to your dome. It extends 2 tendrils and twines them, then untwines. Simple, even sweet. But the water reacts. The pressure 1 meter above you dips by a hair. 1 meter below you rises by the same hair. A pressure gradient, small, polite, unmistakable, has been braided into existence right next to your window. You glance at the sensors. The gradient holds not because of moving parts, but moving patterns. The being releases a slow, low-frequency hum, and the gradient tilts sideways like a table being set for dinner. You try to picture the tool and realize the tool is the body. In this unified world, technology is what you are, as much as what you make. The aliens don't bolt gadgets to frames. They grow instruments and wear them like rhythm. A second figure arrives compact and banded with faint geometric marks. It emits a series of pulses your microphones record, as infrasonic a bass too big to hear. The 2 beings braid their tones, and the water between them thickens by the tiniest fraction, just enough to shift its refractive index. Your camera's autofocus hunts then steadies. Light bends a whisper more than it did a heartbeat ago. On land, we build lenses from glass and polish them with hours. Here, a lens is a duet. You think of 1919 Principe and Sobral II eclipse expeditions led by Arthur Eddington and colleagues watching starlight slide past the sun. When the plates came back, the star positions told a new story. Gravity curves space and light follows the curve. A scientific event that turned down into where mass is. You look at the alien's pressure lens and feel a rhyme: bend the medium, bend the light. Rewrite the map of what can be seen. The deep nods to the sky, and the sky nods back. You ask the ocean a tiny question, the only way you can. You ping the sub's external speaker with a gentle, narrow tone. The compact alien answers by lacing a denser seam across your path, and the ping arrives 3 milliseconds earlier than it should, as if the sound took a shortcut. Not faster than sound, we are not breaking physics tonight, but straighter through sound, a pre-sculpted corridor minimizing zig and zag. You remember the SOFAR channel, the real Earth layer, where sound travels far, because temperature and pressure conspire to guide it, and smile at the elegance. They aren't merely using a channel, they are drawing one moment by moment, like chalk lines in invisible air. On the surface, we call this optimizing Wi-Fi, and then spend 6 hours moving the router 14 centimeters while swearing softly. A cluster of tiny constructs drifts in think sand dollars, redesigned by a geometry teacher, with perforations in quasi-crystal patterns. They settle into a loose lattice around your bow. The lattice hums without touch, and the water within it becomes syrupy slow relative to the water outside. Your accelerometers whisper about drag in a box that isn't a box. Density manipulation without additives, no cloud, no gel, just the sly rearrangement of how water hugs itself. A ribbon being threads an arm through the lattice. Its light slow like a song stretched elastically, then snap back to tempo as it withdraws. The experiment is so gentle that your heartbeat decelerates to match the long notes. You didn't choose to relax. Relaxation chose you. You add the thought you don't want to admit. Time feels different. Not clock time, your instruments are stubborn and precise, but you time the way a long Sunday and a short Tuesday can take the same 60 minutes and make 2 different sizes of memory. The lattice hums again, and the cabin quiet tilts toward lullaby. Subjective time, sculpted with pressure and rhythm entrained like a flock, turns, or a theater audience leans in the same direction at once. You've felt lesser versions at concerts in waves in the deep sway of a train. Here, time perception is a knob with a good grip. A caretaker enters the frame and raises a halo of tendrils. Light and sound braid through the halo in a spiral that tightens, loosens, tightens. Your proprioception, your sense of where you are, slips in a friendly way, like stepping onto a moving walkway you didn't see. The sub is stationary. Your body says you're gliding. The caretaker varies the spiral. Your sense of duration stretches like warm taffy, then condenses into a bright bead. You catch yourself whispering, "Wow," as if a planetarium dome has just turned into a storm. Also as if you are a cat watching a laser pointer, which fair. Same awe, fewer judgment calls. You reach for an analogy, and history hands you one in a clean envelope. The Foucault pendulum first hung in 1851 beneath the Panthéon's dome in Paris. Its plane of swing slowly rotating through the day, proving to anyone with a spare hour that Earth spins under their feet. No arguments, no epicycles, just motion revealing motion. The tool was simple. The insight, enormous. Down here, simple gestures in pressure and light reveal fields you didn't know were rooms. Manipulate density a whisper and refraction bows. Nudge pressure in a pattern, and sound behaves as if it were wise. Stroke rhythm just so, and the brain's metronomes tick at a speed that suits the story. The caretaker shifts the demonstration to edges and thresholds. It lays a thin, denser ribbon across the sandy floor between two rocks, and a small fish trying to cross stalls for a heartbeat, confused by the barely there wall. It swims along the ribbon's edge and finds a thinner patch where the gradient is tapered like a doorway. It passes through, unbothered. You chart the field and almost laugh. This is a fence you can walk through with a little patience. Barriers that teach navigation, not enforce gridlock. Urban planners take note. Also cue the world's most civil after you. You realize the possibilities stack like stones. Information sent by refraction patterns that only align when the medium is tuned. Temporary rooms drawn in water to gather without walls. Power harvested by resonance, then guided by density seams toward storage crescents. And yes, moments stretched on purpose, so a lesson can land gently rather than collide. In this unified world, a classroom is a current, and a clock is a suggestion. You test a hypothesis to the extent your little bubble can you tap the hull with two knuckles, soft, soft. Hard. Wait, then repeat. The compact alien answers with light that echoes your rhythm and overlays a faint pressure dip right when you expect it. Anticipation shared across species is a shy thrill. You're playing catch with causality and not dropping the ball. Note to self, add jammed with abyssal band to resume. Remove recorder solo 7th grade unless asked under oath. A historical memory drifts in like a tide you didn't know you were timing, 1960. Trieste Picard and Walsh descending to Challenger Deep. Their steel sphere groaned and popped as the ocean pressed and a flatfish-like shadow startled the world into arguing for years. It wasn't just the record depth. It was the proof that we could be here and come home. Every deep tool since has been a child of that dive. ROVs, AUVs, subs like yours, learning to whisper instead of shout. You hang a silent thank you in the water. Without that event, you'd be asleep in a world that feels smaller. The demonstration resolves into a kindness. The caretaker leans its tendrils toward your dome and paints a slow helix that unwinds your shoulders. The lattice's hum eases your breath into longer lines. Subjective minutes expand enough for details to land a tiny amphipod riding a bubble like a child on a swing. A grain of sand, making a decision and changing its mind. Your own reflection in the glass, softer around the edges than you remember. The aliens dim, and the water returns to ordinary, no thicker, no thinner, simply present. Random fact to drift on the pistol. Shrimp fires a cavitation bubble with its claw that briefly reaches temperatures as hot as the sun's surface, only for a micro-instant only in a speck, but still pretty extra for a shrimp the size of your thumb. You look out over the plain. Across the vast land of Pangaea, long fused, long fractured time made mountains and then forgot them. Down here, time is a more intimate animal tanning, gently under pressure, stretching when asked, curling up when the story wants to end. In this unified world, Physics isn't something separate from life. It's the dialect the ocean speaks when it is trying to be kind. You steady the sub. Write a note your future self will enjoy misreading and set course for the faint line of sentinels you saw before. Somewhere ahead, borders glow that aren't fences and warnings sing that aren't threats. You hum once low and grateful, and the water hums back. You angle the sub toward a dim horizon where the seafloor rises in a tidy, continuous lip. It isn't tall, no cliff, no menace, just a line that runs truer than geology usually bothers to, as if the ocean took a ruler to itself. Your instruments pick up a comb of soft returns, many small things spaced at careful intervals, each giving you the maritime equivalent of a polite nod. The water changes character the way a room does when you step from foyer to hall. You're at the edge of something that does not want to be called a fence. The reef announces itself first as texture, low-braided ridges like woven baskets, perforated arcs like lace, rounded pylons sprouting shallow bowls. Everything curves to the current. Everything leans a little like tall grass in wind. Between the pieces, channels narrow and widen, with an elegant regularity, gates that are also filters, doorways that are also instruments. You drift closer, and a dozen pale ovals lift from the bowls, hover, and settle again. Sentinels. Not statues, not machines in the surface sense, autonomous organisms, each with a ring of cilia that never fully rests, and a skin that maps pressure, the way a bat maps sound. One sentinel rises to meet you, not aggressively but decisively, like a courteous usher stepping into your aisle. Its mantle ripples. A faint cool downdraft brushes the dome. The sub registers a gentle increase in drag. You test your thrusters and feel the ocean saying, "A little slower, please." It's not a no. It's a nudge. If this reef ran a nightclub, the bouncer would hand you earplugs and a glass of water. You pause, let the current carry you sideways along the line. The sentinels track you without converging, each one, adjusting its glow to a complementary hue, until the ridge reads like a gradient bar. You realize they're giving you information where flow is strongest, where chemistry changes, where you'd be better off cruising another day. A narrow slot ahead brightens in a soft invitation. Two sentinels widen it by a whisper. You slip through, and the drag eases your whole body, unconsciously exhaling, as if you'd just walked past two librarians who decided you were trustworthy after all. You look back, and finally see the pattern whole. The border reef is a phase array for water, hundreds of small actors, shifting pressure, light, and microcurrents in concert, so that lines of travel emerge and recede without any wall ever needing to be built. In this unified world, a boundary isn't a line you can't cross. It's a lesson in how to cross well. A memory from the surface arrives with a dry rustle of paper maps, the 1960s revolution in plate tectonics. For decades, continents were mysteries that wandered. Then magnetic stripes on the seafloor told their tidy story. In 1963, Vine and Matthews and Morley, whose insight ran parallel, showed how new crust forms at mid-ocean ridges and locks in Earth's magnetic field as it flips through time, a barcode of the planet's memory. Later, deep-sea drilling cores confirmed the age's youngest at the ridges, oldest faraway proof that the floor itself moves. A major scientific event, the world redrawn under our feet, borders that are not fences, but factories. You glance at the reef and feel the same kind of click edges that create not just separate, boundaries that breathe. The sentinels demonstrate a subtle defense you almost miss. A small shark, sleek, curious, ultimately uninterested in politics, angles toward a nursery hollow beyond the line. Three ovals lift their mantles, sinking into a slow, shared pulse. The water just in front of the shark thickens by a hair, like walking into a heavy curtain. The shark slows, hesitates, and without panic, without pain, turns aside to a clearer lane. The pulse stops. The lane empties. No alarm, no chase, no teeth. A reminder that deterrence can be a whisper rather than a shout, Also, a reminder that "please use the other door" can be an entire engineering discipline. You slide along the reef and spot different casts of sentinel. Some are tall and fluted, reading the far flow and sounding changes down the line. Others are squat-built for torque, working the near water like potters nudge a wheel. A few ride rails, yes rails etched in the composite ridge, gliding to where they're needed and reseating themselves with an elegant twist. Each carries that five-fold quasi-crystal logic you've been chasing since the cores, a pattern that refuses to repeat, yet never loses order. The reef is an argument for complexity that stays kind. Your microphones catch a low conversation, infrasonic purls, light taps of cilia on shell, the faintest hum of pressure, harmonics. The sentinels share information, the way flocking birds do local rapid, good enough to act, never asking for perfect. One sentinel brightens, then dims, and three others adjust their spacing by a body's width, making room for a slow procession of caretakers who pass through with bundles of translucent eggs tucked into their arms like swaddled moons. The border reef opens, then knits itself whole again, as if the gap were only a blink. You think about how surface borders behave. Political brittle, sometimes loud, and how oceans prefer gradient salinity here, temperature. There, a halocline you feel on your tongue if you happen to be a fish with opinions. The aliens didn't import the fence, they tuned the gradient. Across the vast land of Pangaea, when coasts were strange and inland seas breathed, where deserts now sigh, edges were regions, not razor blades. The reef remembers that older logic and makes it local. A ribbon being you recognize from earlier skims along the outside lane and pauses long enough to paint a small arc of light over your dome, 3 short, 1 long, 1 short. You answer with the same count on your acoustic channel. A sentinel flashes a soft acknowledgement and pushes a pocket of clearer water under your hull, the aquatic equivalent of someone fluffing the pillow you didn't know you needed. 5 stars on the border. Hospitality app would cross again. Near a corner where the ridge bends, you see architecture turn into instrument with disarming grace. Small hollows are tuned to resonate at different low frequencies. When the current hits a certain speed, a sequence of notes runs down the line like muskets firing in reverse. No smoke, no fire, just a traveling chord. It's both alarm and weather report. The sentinels adjust their spacing before the change arrives, the way trees lean before a storm. They can't possibly have read on a satellite. The reef doesn't wait to be told. It listens in the tense. You allow yourself 3 small jokes, because even a border that sings can use a smile. First, if these sentinels ran airport security, the trays would come to you, the line would breathe, and nobody would ever have to say belts and shoes again. Second, the keep out sign here reads more like have a snack, take a breath. Try this door, which is an ethos you can get behind and through. Third, if HOA fees apply, they are paid in good behavior and tidy currents, and honestly, that's a currency you'd be happy to carry. You let the silliness pass. The reef goes on being serious without being stern. You test the edge one more time, inching your bow toward a darker basin beyond. The nearest sentinel lifts, spreads its cilia like a fan, and projects a shape you've learned to read as caution, a pentagon that doesn't quite close, spinning slowly. Not a threat, a thought. You stop reverse a meter, and the shape opens into a welcoming spiral. Message received. In this unified world, consent is a current you can feel. Random fact to drift on parrotfish bite coral and grind it into fine sand as they feed one big individual can poop hundreds of pounds of sandy beach a year. Somewhere up there, a postcard owes its sunset to a fish's breakfast. You hover and take the border in as a whole ridge, bowls, rails, sentinel songs. It feels less like a line on a map and more like the soft skin at the edge of an eyelid where seeing begins and ends a dozen times a minute. The sentinels dim in a ripple, as if winking without eyes. You wink back a tiny ping in a language you barely know, and set the sub to follow the curve. Somewhere past the bend, Other edges wait some, that invite some, that listen, none that forget to breathe. You round the border reef's bend, and meet a light that does not belong here. It's square, bright, impatient, the kind of light that thinks a meeting could have been an email, and decided to come anyway. Your pupils contract reflexively. Your microphones pick up a mechanical whine, a prop wash, and the tinny heartbeat of a transponder. On the sand ahead, a rectangle of seabed looks shaved tracks pressed into silt, a cable looping like a lazy snake, a small cloud the color of unbaked bread rolling along the bottom. You know that signature. An ROV human industrious a little loud has been at work. You drift to the side and dim everything you can dim. The plume climbs, then flattens into a turbid ceiling, and when it thins, the scene below has changed. A low dome, no bigger than a cottage, sits revealed at the base of a scarp. It's familiar in grammar, if not in detail, mineral organic composite piezo veins, quasi-crystal filigree, around pressure seam doors. An outpost tucked into geology's fold, like a secret kept in a coat's inner pocket. In this unified world, privacy is mostly a matter of choosing a quiet current and hoping nobody brings a leaf blower to the party. 2 sentinel ovals rise from shallow cups near the dome and turn toward the evidence of your species. They don't brighten. They don't bristle. They measure. Pressure ripples cross their mantles and slither down into the sand like rain into dry soil. A narrow lane opens in the water between them, and the silt that wanders toward the dome finds itself redirected. Not vanished, not scolded, nudged into a lazy eddy that carries it away to settle where it can be forgotten. You can't help a small smile a doorman who prefers to move the sidewalk rather than argue about shoes. A compact caretaker slides from the outpost and hovers under the plume's edge. Its tendrils unfurl like an umbrella story you almost understand. It lays a lattice of faint density lines across the water's face, and the falling silt sorts itself by grain size. Fine passes heavy drops until the outpost's door sits beneath a clearing in the gray. The dome's skin glows very, very faintly, as if acknowledging the courtesy with a nod. You steal the nod and add your own. Your camera pans the human ROV is still nearby, working a few lengths downslope. Its manipulator arm paws at the seabed, exploring nodules sampling doing exactly what it was built to do. Every shove sends another puff of dust into a world where dust is a language. The ROV swings its light, catches you for an instant, and keeps going. You are one more glow in a place famous for them. You hold still and listen to the 2 civilizations breathe around each other without knowing the other's name. On the outpost's face, a series of small plates rotate valves, perhaps sipping cleaner water from a low intake and letting it exit upslope away from the ROV's work. The intake's filigree feels familiar, those non-repeating quasi-crystal patterns. Again, a geometry that refuses to resonate with turbulence, staying quiet, even as the flow hisses. You think of the way anechoic tiles hush an acoustic chamber on the surface, each wedge eating echo until silence has texture. The outpost is doing the same with silt turning a mess into a murmur. You consider tapping the sub's light to warn the ROV, then stop. Surface teams have their protocols. Unplanned light patterns at depth look like problems, and problems recruit boats and chatter you don't want. You settle for the smallest broadcast your vessel can manage. A slow, low sweep across non-navigational frequencies, polite and ignorable. The oceanographic equivalent of leaving a sticky note that says, "Careful wash paint." Whether anyone hears it is another thing. You hope the ocean passes the message the way good neighbors do. The caretaker shifts its attention from filtration to memory. It trails a tendril across the dome's skin and leaves a temporary bloom of light, not decoration, but annotation, a margin note. 3 more caretakers appear, smaller juveniles, by the sparkle of their lights, and station themselves at different angles around the dome. Their pulses offset by fractions, they triangulate the cloud's shape in pressure, and add little nicks of correction to the lattice, until the plume's edge looks not flat exactly, but softened like a bill uncreased and smoothed on a table. The outpost breathes easier. So do you. A scientific turning swims up not because it's the same, but because it rhymes 2012 900 meters down off Japan, when a team from NHK and the National Museum of Nature and Science filmed a live giant squid for the first time. It wasn't a monster, so much as a living thread of old stories, golden eyes bright in the ROV's lamp's myth meeting lens with a bow. Technology made that encounter possible, but what made it history was etiquette, patience, low-light, quiet approach. You watch the outpost absorb a storm your species raised, and think here is another hinge. Not the first to the aliens, surely, but maybe the first we might someday recognize when we learn to arrive softly enough to be invited. The ROV backs away, paying out cable like a careful kite flyer. It noses a different patch of nodules and nudges one. A side camera on your sub catches a ribbon being slip into the ROV's shadow, the way reef fish shelter under a sea turtle. It tastes the wake with a twist, then vanishes into the dark. There's a joke in it that makes you huff a laugh through your nose. Everybody loves free shade, even at the bottom of the world. Add to list shade sharing a universal. The plume thins. The outpost dims its glow to the softest ember, the way you dim a screen when someone sleeps beside you. The sentinels sink into their cups, leaving tiny spirals in the sand, as if to sign the bottom of a letter. The juvenile caretakers linger a moment longer and trace 3 slow arcs in the clear water, a practiced gesture that feels like all right now. You answer with a hum you've used to mean thank you, and I see it, and same. In this unified world, gratitude is a pressure pattern. You give yourself permission to think like a logistics officer for a minute. If the dredgeheads and collectors ever come in fleets, and on some maps, they already do in shaded boxes with tidy names, this place will need more than 2 sentinels and a polite lattice. You imagine curtains drawn wide to steer rivers of silt around delicate throats, pressure rooms that gather panicked fish without traps, energy grids that surge just enough to keep breathers breathing until the storm has rolled by. You imagine a conversation you can't yet have. We are here. Yes, we know. We would like to stay. Then let's tune the gradient together. It's a hope, but tonight, hope feels like physics you could almost learn. A small comic tableau wobbles into view and demands at least a smile. A deep-sea sea cucumber inching across a cable, pausing at a plastic tie as if it's a mountain pass, then assembling its body into a determined squish and conquering the summit with all the gravitas of a toddler mounting a sofa. You salute the expedition. If glaciers can be rivers of ice, that was a very brave ravioli. Random fact to drift on. Greenland sharks likely live for 2 to 4 centuries. Some estimates suggest near 400 years, meaning a few alive today were already old when Newton was worrying about apples. Down here, long life isn't rare. It's a pace. Your gaze rests on the dome again. If an outpost can show personality, this one's is patient. No scolding, no retreat. Measure, adapt, continue. A major event up top once taught our species the same lesson when Apollo 8 looped around the moon in 1968 and turned the camera toward Earth. The Earthrise image landed in millions of minds at once. The planetary neighborhood suddenly felt both vast and shared. Borders didn't vanish, they shrank. You feel a smaller version now, 2 neighbors sharing a street during a clumsy move, hauling furniture through a narrow door, and laughing, a little embarrassed, a little proud. The ROV turns homeward, cable tightening in the dark like a thought collected. Your instruments settle. The sand forgets. The outpost light goes from ember to afterthought. You take a last look at the tracks already softening and angle the sub along a lane the sentinels have left open, as if they expected you to choose it. You do. Across the vast land of Pangaea, long-joined, long-unraveling chance meetings rewrote continents. Down here, chance meetings write smaller, kinder scripts. You follow one line through the other and let the ocean file the page. And because sleep likes a hat tip, if deep-sea mining had a mascot, it would be a very earnest vacuum with a clipboard. May all clipboards learn to whisper. You ride a gentle slope of darkness until the water ahead begins to feel like a hall with perfect acoustics. The seafloor falls away into a wide trough, and your instruments taste a layer where sound likes to linger the ocean's own whispering gallery. The caretakers arrive without fanfare, ribbon bodies, dim tendrils, lifted as if listening with their hands. You lower the sub's lights and let the room prepare itself. A pulse, low, long, warm, rolls through the layer and nests in your ribs. It isn't alien. It's familiar. It is a whale far above, singing down the staircase of water, the way someone might sing up a stairwell to test the echo. Another voice joins, then another, overlapping braids that grow and shed motifs, as if the ocean were knitting in real time. You think of all the times you've heard recordings of these voices muffled by speakers and rooms. Here unmediated, the notes lay themselves across your skin and take a seat. The aliens do not interrupt. They tune. A caretaker draws a slow spiral in pressure along the edge of the trough. Another traces a line that's straight, only because it's constantly corrected like a tightrope in a lazy wind. The layer thickens by a hair, and the whale's phrase lengthens, not because the singer slows, but because the room does. The next note arrives with the same pitch, but wears a longer coat of resonance. A third caretaker paints 5 faint density dimples, equally spaced, and when the voice climbs past them, overtones blink soft pentagonal lanterns in sound. The motif you've been chasing in stone and light now breathes in music. You remember what history did with this voice. In 1970, humans released songs of the humpback whale. Roger Payne's recording that gathered living cathedral notes into plastic and paper and turned a niche science into a cultural tide. The album seeded the Save the Whales movement. Laws shifted. Fleets changed course. The ocean was allowed to keep some of its singers. A scientific event that recruited art as ally. You listen now and feel another hinge loosening, not because a new law is written, but because a new layer is speaking. The caretakers lay corridors in the water, the way city planners lay bike lanes, and sound chooses them, without knowing it's choosing. A long phrase arcs across the trough and hits a sculpted patch. The note emerges sheened like light from a polished stone. The second voice answers from a different angle, and the patch previews the shimmer a breath early, as if the ocean were practicing the phrase before the singer arrives. Anticipation isn't everything, but tonight it is generous. You bring the sub closer to a ridge bristling with shallow bowls. Each bowl is tuned to a narrow band of low frequency. When a note near its preference passes, the bowl doesn't ring so much as lean passing a polite nudge to its neighbors. The effect is small, so small you wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it. But across the whole ridge, the nudges sum. The whale's phrases don't change. The context changes around them until a pattern emerges that could be read. In this unified world, ink is optional. A margin can be a medium. The singers climb into a new figure, and the caretakers answer with a motif, 5 pulses, not perfectly spaced, a quasi-crystal rhythm that refuses to repeat, but refuses to forget. The figure finds the whales like a steady hand on a piano lid. The next chorus arrives subtly squared, then gently rounded, then squared again, as if the ocean were tracing the outline of a symbol with sound. You imagine a mind at the surface, human tired, careful looking at a spectrogram, and frowning as a pentagon that doesn't quite close rises from the noise. Not menace, not mistake. A shape. You think of the So Far channel, the real One Sound's favorite highway that runs like a secret ring around the world. In wartime, hydrophones rode that ring and heard engines and storms from oceans away. In peacetime, songs ride it to connect whales you will never meet. The aliens don't own the channel. They just offer it warmer gloves and better shoes. Corridors pre-shaped for verses turn softened so choruses breathe gaps in the wall where bridges want to be. A shadow lifts near your dome, unhurried sovereign, a sperm whale all head and history, rising from a deeper black you've only visited in borrowed courage. It clicks a metronome with thunder in it, and the clicks cascade into coda's little dialects that other whales parse like postcards from cousins. The caretakers lay a faint comb of pressure ridges ahead, and the codas pick up a shimmer, a faint envelope that turns each cluster into sentence, and each sentence into paragraph. You aren't sure how you know, but you know the alien signature rides differently on clicks than on songs. Less lace, more handwriting. Above you, distant metal lives. Ships move. Sonar pings. Somewhere a buoy listens. The caretakers turn the layer gently so the whale's motifs arrive clear, while the rest of the world's noise meets edges that encourage it to take the long way round. Noise isn't banned. It's tired, and the ocean lends it a chair until it forgets what it was saying. If only more meetings worked like that. A juvenile caretaker peels away from the ridge and sketches a looping phrase in light across your viewport. Short, short, long, long. Then presses a tendril to the sand and leaves a pentagon that dissolves before it's born. You answer with a three-note acoustic chirp you hope sounds like appreciation, and not say, "Please bring snacks." The juvenile sparkles, then tucks under a ledge exactly the way children tuck under tables when guests arrive, listening with their whole faces. Somewhere above, a humpback laughs into a new variation, and the trough answers by softening the corner of its joke. Yes, whales tell jokes. You've decided this. Science may need a minute. You test the line between engineering and etiquette. You nudge the sub a meter deeper into the layer and send a faint, rising sweep too small to be rude, large enough to be noticed, then shut up. The caretakers slot a filter over your tiny voice, the way a sound engineer drapes velvet over a harsh mic. The sweep emerges rounder and gets lost on purpose, which is both kind and instructive. You can speak here if you learn to speak softly. You can be heard if you learn when not to ask. A historical echo returns quiet and crisp 1985 New Zealand to Tonga. Researchers recording humpback songs across a season and finding the entire population had changed the tune together, adopting new phrases as if the ocean were a radio and the whales a single traveling choir. Cultural transmission, but salted and vast. You watch now and wonder whether the caretakers have learned to seed motifs at the edges, trusting culture to carry them, warnings that are melodies, invitations that are hooks. Across the vast land of Pangaea long gone, long held rivers. Braided species migrated songs, traveled in bodies that knew the way. Here, the body is the water. The singers fade northward, their notes stepping onto the channel's long sidewalk. For a minute, the trough holds their ghosts' reverberations, thinning like fog over a lake. Then even the ghosts agree to be dreams. The caretakers sink to their ordinary brightness, which is to say kindness. You realize your jaw has unclenched again. You hadn't noticed it clenched. The layer did. A small comedy drifts past a lanternfish sidling backward into a shadow, as if pretending to be a drawer closing itself. It fails. You award it points for effort. Handler note, stealth level, adorable. You make a recording you know won't carry the room. Send a note, topside, patterns in so far. Pentagonal hints. Listen for what the ocean is already saying. You can't annotate the water from here, not in a way that survives translation, but you can whisper in the ear of a colleague who hears poetry in spectra. Random fact, to drift on a blue whale's heartbeat can be heard from over 2 miles away with the right gear, and when it dives, that heart can slow to as few as 2 beats per minute, an entire library shelving itself between impulses. You look out across the dark. In this unified world, messages don't have to arrive in mailboxes. They can arrive in habits. Across the vast land of Pangaea, once one shore, now many, the oldest roots still remember where they went. Tonight, the message for the surface is not a command, but a cadence. Slow soften, listen. The rest will find you. A tremor brushes the hull so lightly you could mistake it for a thought. The sub's accelerometers disagree. One clean click on the graph, then a second, then a long, low roll that writes itself into your bones. The silt ahead lifts in a breath and settles. Not panic, not yet. Far off, the water blushes with a dim, ruddy haze, the kind of color the ocean makes only when stone remembers fire. You drift a meter higher and listen. The seafloor answers with a hush like wind through 1,000 throats. Somewhere beneath, magma is negotiating with water, and their compromise is going to be loud. The caretakers feel it before your instruments finish their sentence. A ribbon being sweeps across your bow and leaves a ribbon of denser water that leans you gently away from the source. 2 compact sentinels rise along a ridge and shape a corridor the way traffic cones shape a lane, except these cones purr and the lane moves with you. You follow not because you must, but because the current now knows a kinder way to go. In this unified world, guidance arrives as comfort. The first blast turns the haze into a plume. It doesn't thunder. It blooms a mushroom of particulates, mushrooming in slow motion under pressure. You can taste in your molars. Fragments of new rock glass born so fast it forgets to be crystal arc and fall cooling as they meet a cold that is everywhere. Pillow lavas swell and stack like a baker. Forgot the ratios and made too much bread delicious geology. Do not eat. The light paints itself orange on the cloud, and for a moment the deep looks like a sunset caught without sky. Your mind vaults to a human moment when volcanoes and water introduce themselves properly. In 2009, the ROV Jason peered into West Mata in the Lao Basin and recorded the first high-definition footage of an explosive deep-sea eruption. Lava bubbled and shredded into shards. Sulfur flashed. The ocean ate the heat and smiled a scientific event that turned rumors into a film you could pause. You remember the footage and feel the rhyme, now camera, then you now. Plume then plume now, awe then awe, always. A mining survey, ROV, maybe the same one. Maybe its cousin creeps into view along the edge of the cloud, lights. Too bright, arm, dutiful attitude, very, I'm just doing my job. A pressure curl from the plume catches its tether and tugs not hard, but up and to the side like a toddler discovering gravity has handles. The ROV yaws toward a field of fresh rubbery pillows, exactly the kind of place a tether likes to practice knots. You bite your lip. Your hands hover over thrusters. Help is a reflex. You don't need to choose. The caretakers move first. A trio of ribbon beings stretch into a shallow arc between the ROV and the pillows and thicken the water along their bodies, a soft railing. The tether brushes the arc and rides along it instead of biting. 2 compact sentinels slide under the ROV's nose and pump a countercurrent no stronger than a sigh, just enough to ease metal away from glass that has not learned to stop being soft. You watch your species' curiosity saved by someone else's manners. Across the vast land of Pangaea, when ridges rose and seas closed, neighbors learned to share edges. Down here, the lesson holds. Another tremor ticks the graph closer. The plume darkens, the chemistry shifts, and your sensors yodel about sulfides. The caretakers bloom curtains you've met before, bioluminescent filaments that open and close by fractions. They're not fishing tonight. They're filtering, steering the densest fallout toward collecting bowls and away from gills and intakes and mouths that didn't order ash. A school of deep-sea smelt hunkers in the lee of a pylon, the way hikers hunker behind a cairn. Silver bodies dimmed to the polite gray of "we'll wait here." One caretaker drifts over them and paints a loop stay, and the smelt stay. A larger ribbon being rises from the plume edge, scarred with fine-heeled lattice. Old burns turned to function. It carries a crown of piezo-veined filaments that glitter like frost. The filaments taste the ash-pregnant water and shiver, tripping tiny charges that help clump the finest particles into heavier snow. What would have hung hangs less. What would have scratched settles. It's flocculation. Writ lovely a cleanliness you can see. You whisper thank you without remembering to be embarrassed. If your air filter back home had a personality, it would be this calm, glowing, incapable of sighing about the mess you made. You angle your sub to present a smaller cross-section to the fall and edge along the caretaker-made lane. Off your starboard, a narrow ravine channels a glowing trickle-liquid rock, slowing to chewable temperature. Where it meets seawater, glass skins swell, crack, heal, and swell again. Pillows birthing pillows, an undersea nursery of stone. Tiny white crabs, audacious as toddlers in rain boots, test each new surface and declare it acceptable property. A ribbon being passes over and lays a thin density seam along the ravine lip, a guardrail for the curious. It's not a wall. It's a suggestion your whole body understands. The plume hiccups brighter, and a gust of hot, particle-rich water sweeps the lane. Your temperature gauge spikes still far from danger, still startling. A compact sentinel kicks a pressure cord you've learned to read as brace, and your hands tighten without thinking. The cord travels down the line of sentinels, and you hear the reef answering from far off, a traveling murmur, like rain moving across a city's roofs. Minutes later, the plume's heart settles into a slower push. The ash lightens. The reef's murmur fades. Cities up top make sirens. Cities down here make lullabies that include instructions. The ROV team has seen enough. The machine heaves backward cable, gathering itself like the world's longest snake, deciding to be tidy. As it passes you, it does the machine equivalent of a wave. A polite blink of a status LED. You blink back. You are not above waving at appliances. You thanked a kettle last week. No regrets. With the worst past, the caretakers pivot from defense to repair. They comb the water with soft pressure teeth, coaxing leftover clouds toward bowls that will tuck ash into strata like a book into a shelf. They paint pentagons that don't quite close over nursery hollows. Caution the gentle kind, and open spirals over corridors, welcome, but slow. The reef brightens and dims in a chord you can almost hum. You hum anyway. Your glass fogs a little with the smallest laugh. A new sound arrives not from stone, not from machine, dolphinish, clicks closer than you expect. A pod has wandered down the slope drawn by the novelty fridge light of eruption. They wheel at the curtain, test the texture, accept the guidance, and skirt the bowls without argument. One juvenile fails to resist a tiny doomed game of poke. The new rock gets a puzzled snout and zips back to its mother like a kid sidling behind an adult after misjudging a hot pizza. A caretaker inks the water with a short long that reads careful even in your bones. The juvenile blinks, and you swear blushes. Yes, you just projected embarrassment onto a dolphin. Welcome to the club. You think of another hinge when worlds overlapped and favors crossed species without asking for a receipt. In 1977, the same year black smokers surprised everyone, scientists found blind shrimp and tube worms flourishing at vents on chemistry alone. The event wasn't just a list of species. It was proof that life makes do with what is not what we assumed. Tonight, a related proof civilizations can share a lane in a storm without swapping flags. What counts as aid here isn't heroics. It's small, constant reductions of harm. Your instruments settle back into their bedtime pulse. A last burp of ash dances in the curtain and vanishes into blue-black. The lava ravine cools to a satin that will turn matte by morning that isn't morning down here. The smelt leave their lee in a ribbon. The dolphins trade a few happy consonants and arc away. The sentinels dim in a ripple that reads good night, if you've decided to read it that way, and you have. Random fact: to drift on black smoker, vent fluids, can reach around 400 degrees 752 DGF without boiling, because the water is under such high pressure, basically a pressure cooker the size of an ocean. Dinner will be ready. In a few million years, you drift above the new pillows and feel the planet being freshly made under your feet. Across the vast land of Pangea, when mid-ocean ridges stitched continents and tore them in the same breath fire met water, and wrote coastlines you now call home. Here the stitch is smaller, softer shared. In this unified world, overlap isn't collision. It's choreography. You log coordinates, tuck a note to future, you return after dust. Bring patience, and let the caretaker's lane carry you away from the gentle glow. Behind you, the ocean files today's page into stone. Ahead, the dark breathes like a big animal deciding to nap. You match it, long inhale, longer exhale, and your sub sighs with you, like a friend who knows the story will keep. You follow the current out of the cooling lava field, expecting the water to return to its usual slow heartbeat. But the rhythm you drift into is different. It's not the pulse of geology or the hum of machinery. It's the syncopated flicker of conversation. The first lights appear at a distance, drifting like embers from a slow-burning fire. But as your sub approaches, you see that they aren't scattered. They're arranged in lines and clusters, each cluster flashing in patterns that don't quite match the others. It's a debate fluid quiet, but charged. Caretakers and ribbon beings circle one another in loose spirals, light pulses overlapping like voices in a meeting where everyone knows the agenda, but not the outcome. 5 pulse sequences your old friends anchor much of the exchange, but they bend in tempo and spacing, as if one faction prefers a fast beat, while another slows the measure. Compact sentinels linger along the periphery, not intervening, but maintaining a certain geometry in the crowd, like ushers making sure the aisles stay clear. You dim your lights further and keep the sub's silhouette low. This isn't a performance for you. It's a civic conversation, and you're the stranger in the balcony. From the exchanges you've witnessed so far, you can guess the subject whether to remain hidden or rise toward the surface. Some light patterns mimic the spiral motifs you saw in their stories, curling upward before vanishing. Aspiration given shape. Others pulse in tight closed loops, a visual stay. The tension isn't hostile. It's patient, as if the conversation has been running for years, and will keep running long after you've gone. It reminds you of another long debate in human history, the centuries when people argued about the existence of other continents. Some insisted that what lay beyond known seas was only water. Others claimed new lands must be out there. The eventual proof ships returning with maps and cargo didn't end the argument so much as move it to new territory. How to meet, how to trade, how to change. You feel the rhyme here, proof already exists, but the decision of what to do with it is the hard part. A caretaker with long, luminous tendrils glides to the center of the gathering. Its body brightens in concentric rings, pulsing outward in a slow sequence, 5. Pause, 3, 5, again. The crowd responds with overlapping spirals of light, some speeding up to match others, deliberately slowing their phase out of sync. You realize you're watching not just content, but strategy light and rhythm, used to test the willingness of others to adjust. 2 juveniles, brighter and more restless, break formation and dart toward your sub. You hold steady, letting them circle your dome. One paints a spiral that rises toward the surface before fading. The other answers with a closed pentagon that stays tight around the glass. An argument in miniature. You respond with a neutral acoustic sweep, not leaning one way or the other. They hover undecided, before sliding back to the group, their pulses now muted. Then something shifts. A cluster on the eastern edge of the assembly tightens formation, their light snapping into a crisp sequence. Long, long, short, short, long. Across the gathering, another faction answers with the same pattern, but reversed, short, short, long, long, short. The alternation spreads, and the reef below joins in with a soft, synchronized shimmer. It's not resolution, but it's rhythm, and rhythm is a kind of peace. Your thoughts flick briefly to the Cold War's hotline between Washington and Moscow, a phone line no one wanted to use, but everyone was relieved to have. It didn't erase differences, but it created a space where reaction could be replaced by conversation. This shimmering back and forth feels like that an acknowledgement that disagreement can be structured, so it doesn't become rupture. A compact sentinel drifts toward you, its mantle dim except for a single slow pulse. It lingers by your hull just long enough for you to feel the pressure change, a polite tap like someone lowering their voice to speak privately. The pulse repeats, then stops. It might mean you've seen enough, or perhaps you've been seen enough. Either way, you incline the sub a few degrees and let the current carry you sideways out of the circle. From the edge, you see the gathering's shape more clearly. The factions have rearranged into a loose spiral with the most cautious voices near the center and the more exploratory ones at the rim. Light ripples flow from core to edge and back, smearing differences into gradients. The longer you watch, the more it feels like the debate itself is the point, that this constant negotiation is how the civilization stays balanced. You imagine what it might look like if the surface could witness this streams of living light forming arguments and compromises in real time, visible from above, as shifting constellations on the sea. It would change the conversation about alien contact overnight, replacing questions of if with questions of how. The current tugs your bow toward a dimmer path, and you take it, leaving the spiral's glow behind. As it fades, you feel the same quiet satisfaction you get when a book leaves its central mystery intact, frustrating to the impatient part of you, but deeply right for the part that understands. Some answers are only alive when they're unfinished. A small absurd scene breaks the mood just enough. A deep-sea jelly-all bell and trailing threads drifts into your light cone and does a slow backflip for no apparent reason. It writes itself with the languid air of someone pretending it was intentional. You award it a 7.5 for style, 10 for commitment. Random fact: to drift on octopuses can edit their own RNA, allowing them to adapt protein production in their nervous systems without changing their DNA. In a way, they rewrite themselves in real time, like changing the instrument without changing the song. You take one last look over your shoulder. The spiral of debate still glows, pulsing at two tempos that refuse to cancel each other out. Across the vast land of Pangaea, when rivers braided without asking the sea for permission, conflict often meant movement, not fracture. Here the movement is light, the fracture avoided by making rhythm instead of rupture. The current ahead darkens, but there's a pull to it, a gravity of secrecy. Somewhere beyond the deepest trench waits, and with it, whatever they've chosen to keep for themselves. The trench arrives the way sleep arrives, gradually, then all at once. One moment you're drifting over an uneven plain of ridges and bowls, and the next, the world simply drops away. Your depth gauge ticks steadily downward, numbers stacking like an elevator display in slow motion. Outside, the last scatter of bioluminescent drifters thins to a few stubborn sparks. Even the caretakers keep their distance, now skimming along your flanks, but never in front, as though guiding you toward a threshold they cannot or will not cross. The slope steepens until it's a wall, a skin of basalt worn into long, vertical flutes. Here and there you see inlays, thin veins of that same quasi-crystal lattice you've been finding in towers, ridges, and outposts. They catch the faint spill of your lights and send it crawling down the wall in tiny mirrored fragments, like a breadcrumb trail laid for eyes you don't have. At nearly 10 kilometers down, you cross a line your sensors can't name, but your body feels. The water seems thicker, not just from pressure, but from intention. The trench floor spreads below, not flat, but terraced like a giant staircase. At the far end, half lost in haze, something rises that doesn't belong to geology. You angle the sub closer, and the haze parts in slow, rolling folds. A monument stands there, taller than any of the alien towers you've seen, its base, rooted in a fan of radiating arcs carved into the sediment. The arcs echo that five-fold geometry again, though here it's writ monumental, each branch wide enough for your sub to follow like a road. The structure's body is a pillar of dark composite, its surface etched with hundreds, maybe thousands of shallow depressions that catch and release the faint bioluminescence swirling around it. It's not a beacon, it's a recorder. The depressions are arranged in spirals, some tight, some loose, each spiral crossing, others at angles that form patterns you've seen in stories. Power grids, even in whale songs. You don't know the code, but you know what it is, a memory set in stone waiting for those who can read water as language. The caretakers keep to the periphery now. A single ribbon being drifts forward and hovers halfway between you and the pillar. It paints a slow spiral in light, rising until it fades into the haze above, then repeats the same shape descending. An arrival and a return. You hear yourself whisper, "You came from here." It fits. The monument isn't just history, it's origin. The design isn't for decoration. It's a map of beginnings, maybe of exile. A quiet thought threads its way in. They've stayed hidden, not because they can't reveal themselves, but because they've chosen not to. And the choice is anchored here. Your mind goes to human history, again, 1977, the Voyager. Golden records launched into space, engraved with sounds, greetings, and music meant for whoever might find them. They were artifacts of introduction, not warning. But this monument feels like the inverse, not sent outward, but kept close. Not hello, but remember. A scientific historical hinge you can feel, but not turn. You edge closer, and your external mics pick up a faint, constant hum, not mechanical but geological, the slow groan of the planet itself. The pillar's lattice catches it, amplifies it into patterns of vibration that travel through the trench floor. The monument is literally inscribed into the sound of the earth. For a long moment, you just let yourself float there, hands off the controls, watching the faint shimmer along the pillar's face. Your own reflection stares back from the dome, small, fragile, irrelevant in the scale of this place. And yet you're here. The ribbon being makes one last pass in front of you, then turns toward the dark. Its lights dim until only a faint thread glows down its body, pulsing at the same rhythm as the pillar's hum. It disappears into the trench without looking back. The caretakers follow suit, fading one by one into the haze. The last to go is a compact sentinel, which hovers just long enough to give a single slow pulse pentagon almost closed and then sinks after the others. You're alone with the monument. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you know you can't stay here forever. Pressure is patient, but not infinite, and the surface waits. You power up the sub's ascent thrusters, the hull groaning softly as you rise. The monument dwindles its arcs, merging back into the trench floor, until finally the haze swallows it whole. As the lightless water folds around you, you find yourself thinking less about the alien city, the gardens, the debates, the music, and more about the choice they've made to stay unseen. A choice that feels less like fear and more like the discipline of a civilization that knows what it wants to keep for itself. Random fact to drift on the Mariana Trench's deepest known point, Challenger Deep, could fit Mount Everest inside it, with over a mile of water to spare. The ocean always leaves room for more. Above the pressure lightens the dark, begins to hint at blue, and somewhere far off a whale starts to sing. The surface is still distant, but the message from below feels close. Some stories are told in light. Some are kept in the deep until they're ready to be shared. Let go of the controls. Let the hum of the sub fade into the background, a second heartbeat beneath your own. Picture the trench falling away below you, the monument now only a memory pressed between layers of water and time. The caretakers are gone from view, but their patterns still echo faintly, a rhythm you can almost feel in your fingertips if you hold still enough. Above you, the ocean opens slowly, its weight easing in invisible layers. The dark is no longer absolute. It softens into a deep indigo that bends into blue. The currents here are lazier, warmer, carrying with them the quiet shuffle of drifting plankton and the far-off click of some unseen creature at work. You let the sub drift, not rushing the ascent. There's no need. The surface will come when it comes, and for now, you can simply rest in the space between. The hum of the planet is still there if you listen not in your ears, but in your bones. Your eyes grow heavier as the movement becomes slower, smoother, the water cradling you in its steady hands. Each breath draws out longer than the one before, the air tasting faintly metallic and cool. Somewhere far above, the line between ocean and sky waits. Somewhere far below, the monument keeps humming, carving its patterns into the slow heartbeat of the earth. Both exist at once, and you are suspended between them, as much a part of the water as the light that moves through it. Let the current carry you. Let the weight slip from your shoulders. Let the deep keep its secrets for now. The story will be there when you're ready to return. Good night.